I'm Kathleen Cardinelli, and my curricular design project is about the American Dream then and now. I chose this topic because when I was student teaching at Charlotte High School, the curriculum guide we used also had a unit on the American Dream, but it was really boring and inaccessible. So I wanted to find a way to do the same thing, but make it a little more fun. Following is my annotated bibliography. It's about as exciting as an annotated bibliography gets, but I did try to draw from a series of different sources and different types of sources, which is something that's a little unusual for me. First off were the two main novels that the unit revolved around. Initially, we're going to focus on The Great Gatsby, and then it's going to move into The House on Mango Street. This allows students to see what the American Dream was like, or at least how it was perceived in the 1920s, versus something more contemporary, which would be The House on Mango Street. Next are a series of poems. The students during their lessons will be evaluating these differently, and I tried to get ones that had variants of opinions on the American Dream. Some saying that it's here and we can grab it and it's wonderful, and others saying that, I've never seen it, and others even saying that it's not there anymore. I also chose to use a number of songs. This is what I did at Charlotte, and this is what really got the kids into it. By giving them a series of different songs from different genres that still reflect on the same theme, the students become very excited about discussing the American Dream. Obviously, because I had an urban audience, they all loved Kanye West's All Falls Down, and I do too, so I can't complain about that. But I also used Good Charlotte's Waldorf Worldwide, which they may have recognized, but probably not listened to on their own. And I also used American Dream by Bad Religion, because it provides a much more contrary opinion about the American Dream. I did use a couple websites. They varied in what they were about. Predominantly, it's about the 20s. One of them's an article about the American Dream. Just things that students wouldn't really be able to get out of a textbook for the most part, but really would help them to understand what they would be learning. I did use two separate web quests because although when I started my teacher education I hated web quests, I thought they were cliche, I hated doing them, I hated making them, but as I've matured a bit, I found that I think they're actually very helpful because it allows students to really take charge of what they're doing, and even though that sounds really cliche, I think it helps them. It's much more interesting to learn background about your information on your own terms than to be given, here's a packet, you should probably know it. So as such, I have one in general about the modern day American Dream, and another one just about Great Gatsby. I did use a series of videos because I feel that based on what we've discussed in class and our extensive use of YouTube, that it has a lot to offer for kids. They vary greatly in what they actually are. The first one listed here is actually Walt Whitman saying his poem, but it's also set to images, and I think music if I recall properly. So it adds layers for kids to evaluate, and it really just brings more meaning to the poem. Whereas the next one is similar, but it's actually just a picture of the author reciting his poem. And I feel that in that one particularly, the way he recites his poem adds a lot to it. The third one deals with the story behind the house on Mango Street because it recently, somewhat recently, just came to its new 25th anniversary. So people went to talk to Sandra Cisneros to see about the actual story and how it came to be. And I think that helps give students a lot of context for what they're learning. And finally, the favorite one I found was something about The Great Gatsby and the decline of the American Dream. And it's something that is so often touched on or alluded to in classes, but it's really not fully embraced. And the video provides an interesting contrast because in Great Gatsby, the American Dream is inachievable and we can't get it, and no matter how much we want it, we'll never be happy. Whereas much of the modern day perception is, well, life is hard, if I try hard enough, I can still get it. And the video helps to sort of visually and audibly explain that dichotomy. I did do a multi-literacy survey. My hope was to get to 3 students and to discuss with them really just how they feel about their school skills versus their life skills, because I feel that there's often a gap between those two things. I did often use students who were actually just out of high school, and although that's probably about a year older than I would like to interview, they're still in a high school mindset. They've yet to experience college, and they still see themselves as high schoolers. I used these 10 questions because I felt that they each portrayed something about the student's life. What do you do in your free time? What do you do with technology? What would you do without technology? Seeing how students embrace technology in school, and if there's an overlap between those two things. Because my general understanding is that kids sort of have an outside life and a school life, and it's very rare that there's a blending of them. And that's really what I wanted to understand. I also, with the last question, I asked, in what ways do you consider yourself literate? And this was sort of my curveball question, because outside of a literacy major, most people would say I can read and write, so I'm literate. So I wanted to see if they gave me that answer or if they had a bigger understanding. The first subject I used was B. He's a recent graduate of a private religious school in Syracuse, and for the most part, he focused on sports and spending time with people. He wasn't huge on the use of technology. He did watch some TV, he did play some video games, but a lot of times that was with other people or watching sports. He was very focused in what he discussed. He really does not see his outside skills as being useful in school, because it seems that his school setup is very traditional. He didn't mention really any use of computers, and it was just watching videos, which I thought was a little rough, because that's probably where I was, 12 years ago, so that's pretty rough. He can identify his own strengths, but he doesn't see them as being literacies, and in the same thought, he couldn't make a connection with what ways he was literate. He ended up saying, I can read and write, but I wish I could do this, and this better. And the fact that he recognizes what he can do, what he can't do, and what he'd like to be able to do, but can't bring them all together in an educational setting, I think is interesting and pressing for us as teachers. So that's something that I think really helped to drive what I was focusing on in my curricular design project. Subject 2 is Jay, and she is also a recent graduate of a suburban school in Rochester. She was funny. Her responses were short, they were informal, but she was honest, and she called herself a not very good student. And her life is a big Venn diagram. There's what she does outside of school, what she does in school, and this tiny amount of overlap that's using a computer. She uses a computer in school. She says she does it every week, a couple times a week even. So she recognizes that it has an educational purpose, but she honestly seemed beyond disinterested. She admitted that she uses texting in her classes probably 30% of the time, and obviously not for any educational purpose. So I found that extremely interesting. She was just completely focused on, her outside life, her school life, and them not interacting. She acknowledged some of her skills, which were again sports oriented. She used to be an exceptional gymnast, and she does work outside of school, but none of that relates to school. School is something she had to go to get through, and everything else she does has a purpose. So that seems like another thing that could really help to inform teaching. From the survey, I ultimately deduced that students aren't really aware of their outside skills and how they relate to in-class work. They also don't see in-class work as being relevant to their outside lives. They're mutually exclusive, basically. Most of their interests fell outside school topics, and technology did technically connect the two, as in outside life and school, but it was a shaky bridge. They recognize technology is used in school, but it's sort of kind of They weren't excited, they weren't interested, they did it because they had to. And they really only see themselves as literate in reading and writing. They don't see a connection between their outside lives or their skills that they have developed. So I really think it's important that we recognize that these students do have skills, and they can help them to achieve what we want them to achieve. And that's something that I think that this survey really brought out for me, that that's something that's not focused on in schools. We focus so much on catering to tests and state scores and requirements that really the kids just feel overwhelmed by do this, get this percentage, without realizing that they're learning anything useful.